Richard Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker in the early evening darkness. At 42, he had everything money could buy: this luxury apartment with its panoramic views, a vacation, home in the Hamptons, and a collection of vintage cars that would make any enthusiast green with envy. His tech company had gone public 3 years ago, turning him into one of those overnight success stories that had actually taken 15 years of grueling work to achieve. Yet for all his wealth, Richard trusted very few people. Growing up in a neighborhood where everyone was just one missed paycheck away from disaster had taught him harsh lessons about human nature. His own father had left when Richard was just 8, disappearing with the family's meager savings and leaving his mother to raise 3 children on a waitress's salary. "People will always disappoint you if given the chance," his mother used to say. Those words had carved themselves into his mind, becoming both a shield and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Richard sipped his whiskey, the ice cubes clinking against the crystal glass as he turned away from the window. His gaze fell on the framed photo of his mother on the bookshelf, the only personal touch in an otherwise showroom-perfect living room. She had passed away just months before his company went public, never seeing the success her sacrifices had helped create. The sound of quiet humming drifted from the kitchen, reminding Richard that he wasn't alone. Elena Mendoza, his housekeeper of 3 months, was preparing to leave for the day. The humming stopped, and he heard the careful closing of cabinets and the soft footsteps that announced her approach. "Mr. Harrington, I've finished everything on today's list," Elena said, appearing in the doorway. She was in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that looked tired but remained alert and observant. "The fresh groceries are put away, dinner is in the fridge with heating instructions, and I've replaced the towels in all bathrooms." Richard nodded, studying her. In the 3 months she'd worked for him, Elena had been nothing short of perfect, reliable, thorough, and discreet. She arrived at exactly 9 a.m. each day and left at 5 p.m., never calling in sick, never making excuses. Yet something in him couldn't accept that anyone could be this dependable without an ulterior motive. "Thank you, Elena. Same time tomorrow?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral despite the plan forming in his mind. "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you need anything else before I go?" Richard shook his head. "No, that will be all." As she turned to leave, he called after her, "Oh, and Elena, I noticed you rearranged the bookshelf in my office. It looks much better that way." A small smile flickered across her face. "I hope you don't mind." The space seemed more balanced with the heavier books at the bottom. "Not at all. Good night." After Elena left, Richard walked to his home office and stood before the painting that concealed his wall safe. It was a modern piece, splashes of blue and gold that meant nothing to him, but had been recommended by his interior designer as an investment. Behind it was something far more valuable, a safe containing emergency cash, some family jewelry that had belonged to his mother, and documents too important to trust to digital storage alone. The idea had been brewing in his mind for days, but now it crystallized into a plan. A test, simple and direct, to determine once and for all if Elena Mendoza was truly as honest as she seemed. The next morning, Richard waited until Elena had arrived and begun her work in another part of the apartment before entering his office. He opened the safe, removed a stack of $100 bills, $10,000 in total, and placed it near the front, clearly visible. Then he deliberately left the safe unlocked, the door slightly ajar, and the painting swung away from the wall at an angle that suggested haste or carelessness. Before leaving for his office downtown, he activated the hidden security camera he had installed the previous evening, positioned to capture a perfect view of the safe and anyone who might approach it. "A bit extreme, isn't it?" asked Thomas, Richard's oldest friend and business partner, when Richard explained his plan over lunch later that day. They sat at their usual corner table at an upscale restaurant where the prices on the menu had no dollar signs, and the waitstaff remembered their preferences without being told. Richard shrugged, cutting into his steak with precise movements. "It's not about the money. It's about knowing who I'm letting into my home every day." Thomas set down his fork and leaned forward. Unlike Richard, who kept people at arm's length, Thomas collected friends and acquaintances like treasured possessions. His warm personality and genuine interest in others had been a perfect complement to Richard's technical brilliance when they were building their company. "Look, I get being careful," Thomas said. "But this isn't being careful. This is setting someone up to fail, someone who hasn't given you any reason to doubt her." "I'm not setting her up," Richard countered, feeling defensive. "I'm giving her a choice. If she's honest, she'll close the safe and tell me about it. If not—" He let the sentence hang. Thomas shook his head, disappointment evident in his eyes. "Did it ever occur to you that real trust means not needing these kinds of tests? That maybe the problem isn't other people, but your inability to believe anyone could actually be trustworthy?" The words stung more than Richard wanted to admit. "That's easy for you to say. You didn't grow up watching your mother count pennies because your father ran off with everything." "No," Thomas agreed quietly. "I didn't. But I did grow up with a father who taught me to assume the best in people until they prove otherwise. Not the other way around." He reached for his water glass. "All I'm saying is, be careful. Sometimes when you go looking for the worst in people, that's exactly what you find. Not because it's there, but because it's what you expect to see." Richard changed the subject, turning the conversation to their upcoming product launch. But Thomas's words followed him back to his office and stayed with him throughout the afternoon. By the time he headed home, doubts had begun to creep in. Was this test really necessary? Or was it just another way he kept people at a distance? As his private elevator rose to the penthouse, Richard found himself hoping that Elena had passed his test. Or better yet, that she hadn't noticed the open safe at all, sparing him the need to interpret her reaction. The apartment was quiet when he entered, the evening sun casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Everything was in its place, the air scented faintly with the lemon polish Elena used on the furniture. There was no note, no message about finding anything unusual. Richard loosened his tie as he walked to his office, feeling strangely nervous. The door was closed just as he always left it. Inside, everything looked untouched at first glance. The desk was clear, the chair perfectly aligned, the bookshelves organized in the new arrangement Elena had created. Then his eyes went to the wall where the painting hung, and his heart skipped a beat. The painting was back in its proper position, covering the safe completely. Someone had moved it. Someone had seen the safe. With quickening steps, Richard crossed to the painting and swung it aside. The safe door was closed, the digital lock engaged. For a moment he stood frozen, possibilities racing through his mind. Had Elena seen the money and taken some, carefully closing the safe to hide her theft? Had she simply closed it without looking inside? Or had she seen everything and chosen to say nothing? Only one way to find out. Richard entered the code and opened the safe. The stack of bills was there, seemingly untouched. He counted quickly, all $10,000 present. The jewelry box and documents appeared undisturbed as well, but there was something new. A folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before, placed neatly on top of the cash. With slightly unsteady hands, Richard opened it and found a brief message written in careful handwriting. "Mr. Harrington, I noticed your safe was open while dusting your office today. I've secured it for your privacy and protection. If you need assistance finding anything that might be missing, please let me know. Elena Mendoza." Richard sank into his desk chair, the note dangling from his fingers. She had found the safe open, seen the cash, and not only left it all untouched, but had secured it and left a note. The test had been passed with flying colors, and yet instead of satisfaction, Richard felt a crawling sense of shame. He turned to his computer and pulled up the security footage, watching as Elena entered the room around 11 a.m., duster in hand. The camera captured her surprise at seeing the painting askew, then her concern upon discovering the open safe. There was no hesitation, no internal struggle visible on her face, just immediate, instinctive honesty as she carefully closed the safe, restored the painting to its position, and wrote the note he now held. Richard closed the video file and sat in the growing darkness of his office. Thomas had been right. He had set this test expecting, perhaps even hoping in some dark corner of his mind, to catch Elena in an act of dishonesty that would justify his general distrust of people. Instead, he had only proven his own cynicism. The question now was what to do about it. The right thing would be to tell Elena the truth, that he had deliberately left the safe open to test her. But the thought made his stomach tighten with embarrassment. What kind of person did that make? Him? The kind his father had been, a voice whispered in his mind. Manipulative. Untrusting. Richard stood abruptly, unwilling to follow that thought further. He would find another way to make this right. There had to be more to Elena's story. No one was this honest without reason. Perhaps understanding her better would help him understand his own reaction to her integrity. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would begin to learn who Elena Mendoza really was, beyond the perfect housekeeper who had just unknowingly held up a mirror to his own flawed character. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally start to question whether his mother's warning about disappointment was truly an inescapable law of human nature, or simply the bitter lesson of a woman who had been hurt too deeply to see that not everyone would wound her the way his father had. The next morning, Richard woke earlier than usual. Sleep had come fitfully, his dreams haunted by the image of Elena finding the open safe and her simple act of honesty that somehow felt like an accusation. He showered and dressed with unusual care, as if preparing for an important business meeting, rather than a conversation with his housekeeper. By the time Elena arrived, Richard had been sitting at the kitchen island for nearly an hour, nursing his third cup of coffee and rehearsing what he might say. He rarely crossed paths with her in the mornings, usually leaving for his office before she began her work. Today he watched her momentary surprise when she found him still at home. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't expect to see you here. Is everything all right?" Richard nodded, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. "Everything's fine. I thought we might talk before I head out. Would you like some coffee?" Elena hesitated, then set down her bag. "Yes, thank you." She moved with the same quiet efficiency he'd observed in her work, getting her own mug from the cabinet rather than waiting for him to serve her. When she was seated, a careful distance away, Richard cleared his throat. "I found your note yesterday." "Oh." Elena's posture straightened slightly. "I hope I didn't overstep by closing the safe. I just thought—" "No, you did exactly the right thing," Richard interrupted. "But I need to be honest with you. The safe wasn't left open by accident." Elena's brow furrowed slightly, the only sign of her confusion. "I left it open deliberately," Richard continued, the words feeling thick in his throat. "To see what you would do." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by something harder to read. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. She set her coffee mug down carefully, the gentle click against the marble countertop loud in the sudden silence. "You were testing me," she said finally. It wasn't a question. Richard nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "Yes." "And did I pass?" The question held no anger, just a quiet dignity that made Richard feel even smaller. "With flying colors," he admitted. "You did exactly what an honest person should do, which is why I owe you an apology. It was wrong of me to test you that way." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "May I ask why? Have I given you reason to doubt me?" "No," Richard said quickly. "No, it's not you. It's—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain a lifetime of distrust without sounding like he was making excuses. "It's easier to expect the worst," Elena finished for him. "That way, you're never surprised when people let you down." The accuracy of her assessment startled him. "Something like that," he admitted. Elena nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "I understand more than you might think, Mr. Harrington. Life has a way of teaching hard lessons." She stood, smoothing her uniform. "If that's all, I should start my work. The delivery service is coming with your dry cleaning at 9:30. Richard felt a flicker of panic at the thought of ending the conversation this way, with his apology hanging awkwardly between them, and nothing resolved. "Actually, there's something else," he said quickly. "When I opened the safe last night, I found something unexpected." Elena paused, her expression carefully neutral. "The money was all there," Richard continued. "But there was something extra. $120 that wasn't mine." A faint flush colored Elena's cheeks. "Ah, I was hoping you wouldn't notice that right away. Why would you put your own money in my safe?" Elena sighed, returning to her seat. "Last week, while dusting your office bookshelf, I accidentally knocked over a small crystal figurine. A bird, I think. It fell and the wing broke off." She looked down at her hands. "I glued it back, and I don't think you can tell unless you look closely, but I knew it was probably expensive. The extra money was to pay for the damage." Richard stared at her momentarily, speechless. He knew exactly which figurine she meant. A small crystal hummingbird his mother had kept on her bedside table for as long as he could remember. After her death, it was one of the few personal items he'd brought to his new home. He hadn't noticed any damage, which meant Elena had repaired it skillfully enough that it escaped his attention completely. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked. Finally, Elena shrugged, a small self-conscious gesture. "I was afraid you might fire me. Jobs like this one in homes like yours, they don't come along often, and I need the work very badly." There was something in the way she said it, not dramatically but with a quiet certainty, that told Richard there was more to her story. $120 seems like a lot for a small repair, he observed. "I wasn't sure how much it cost," Elena explained, "and I wanted to be sure it was enough." Richard did some quick mental math. Elena worked for him 5 days a week, 8 hours a day at $25 an hour. A rate his wealthy friends had assured him was generous for household help. That meant the money she'd left in his safe represented nearly a full day's pay. "The figurine isn't worth that much," he said gently. "Not in dollars, anyway. It belonged to my mother, so it has sentimental value, but you've already fixed it perfectly. There's no need for you to pay anything." Elena shook her head firmly. "I broke something valuable to you. I need to make it right." Her insistence puzzled Richard. Most people would have accepted the out he'd offered, especially someone who needed the work very badly. Why was she so determined to pay for a mistake he hadn't even noticed? "May I ask you something personal, Elena?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "Why is this job so important to you? With your work ethic and attention to detail, I'm sure you could find employment anywhere." Elena was quiet for so long that Richard thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. "I have a son, Miguel. He's 7. A smile touched her lips briefly before fading. "He has a medical condition, juvenile arthritis. It's not life-threatening, but he needs regular treatments and special care. The health insurance from this job covers most of his medical expenses, and the pay is better than what I was making before." She looked up, meeting Richard's gaze directly. "I work 2 other jobs, evenings at a restaurant and weekend shifts at a laundromat. Between the 3, I can cover our rent, Miguel's treatments, and save a little for emergencies. But this job is the backbone of it all. If I lost it..." She shook her head, leaving the sentence unfinished. Richard felt something shift inside him, a wall beginning to crumble. He had created a simple narrative in his mind. Elena was his housekeeper, a role she performed exceptionally well. He had never considered the life she lived outside his apartment, the responsibilities she carried, the struggles she faced. She wasn't just an employee passing a test of character. She was a mother fighting for her child's well-being. "I'm not going to fire you, Elena," he said quietly. "Not for an accident, and certainly not for being honest about it. In fact, I'm going to insist you take this back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded bills she had left in his safe. "The figurine is fixed, and that's the end of it." Elena shook her head. "I can't accept that. It wouldn't be right." "Then consider it a bonus," Richard suggested, "for exceptional service." "Mr. Harrington, please," he interrupted. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me do this small thing." Elena looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached for the money. "Thank you," she said simply, tucking it into her pocket. An awkward silence fell between them. Richard realized he had never had such a personal conversation with an employee before, had never wanted to. Yet something about Elena made him curious to know more. "Your son," he said, "Miguel. What is he like?" The question seemed to surprise her, but then a genuine smile spread across her face, transforming her features. "He's amazing. Smart, funny, braver than any child should have to be. He loves dinosaurs and space. His room is covered in pictures of stars and planets." Her eyes lit up as she spoke. "Even on his bad days when the pain is worse, he finds something to be happy about. He teaches me more about strength than I could ever teach him." Richard found himself smiling in response to her obvious pride and love. "He sounds like a remarkable kid." "He is," Elena agreed, then glanced at her watch. "I should really start work now." "Of course." Richard stood, suddenly aware that he had delayed her for nearly half an hour. "I'll get out of your way." As Elena gathered her cleaning supplies, Richard made a decision. "I won't be home until late tonight," he told her. "Please feel free to leave whenever you finish, even if it's earlier than usual." She nodded her thanks, and Richard headed for the door, his mind already racing with a new plan. The test he had set for Elena had revealed far more about his own character flaws than anything about her. Now he wanted to make amends in a way that actually mattered. On his way to the office, Richard made a phone call to his personal assistant. "Diane, I need you to clear my afternoon schedule," he said. "And I need you to find me the best pediatric rheumatologist in the city." His assistant, accustomed to his sometimes unusual requests, didn't miss a beat. "Any particular reason, sir?" Richard thought of Elena's face as she spoke about her son, of the money she had saved for months to pay for a broken figurine, of the 3 jobs she worked to keep her small family afloat. "Yes," he said quietly. "I have a debt to repay." 3 days passed before Richard saw Elena again. He had been deliberately staying away from the apartment during her working hours, using the time to set his plan in motion. His personal assistant, Diane, had come through brilliantly, securing him an appointment with Dr. Veronica Chen, widely regarded as the city's leading specialist in pediatric rheumatology. She normally has a 6-month waiting list, Diane had warned him. "But I mentioned your name and your interest in possibly funding her research program, and suddenly there was an opening." Richard didn't bother asking how much such an opening might cost. Money had always been his simplest problem to solve. What proved more challenging was figuring out how to present his offer to Elena. He suspected that a woman who refused to accept back her own money for a repaired figurine wouldn't easily accept charity, no matter how well-intentioned. The last thing he wanted was to offend her pride or make her feel like a charity case. It was Friday afternoon when Richard finally returned to the apartment while Elena was still there. He found her in the kitchen, preparing to leave for the day. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs with too little rest. "Mr. Harrington," she said, clearly surprised to see him. "I was just finishing up. There's a fresh meal in the refrigerator, and I've restocked your pantry." "Thank you, Elena." Richard leaned against the counter, trying to appear casual despite the nervous energy thrumming through him. "How is Miguel doing?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "He's managing. Thank you for asking." She picked up her bag, ready to leave. "Before you go," Richard said quickly, "I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Would you mind sitting down for a moment?" Elena hesitated, then nodded, setting her bag back down. "Is something wrong with my work?" "No, not at all. Your work is excellent." Richard took a deep breath. "This is about Miguel." Her expression immediately sharpened, maternal concern flashing in her eyes. "What about him?" Richard chose his next words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about his condition. I have some connections in the medical community, and I was able to get an appointment with Dr. Veronica Chen. She's apparently one of the best pediatric rheumatologists in the country." Elena's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "The appointment is for Miguel, Richard explained. Next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Dr. Chen has agreed to take him on as a patient, and her office will work directly with your insurance to make sure everything is covered. Any treatments or medications she recommends that aren't covered by insurance, I'll personally take care of. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even tears of relief. Instead, Elena's expression closed off completely, her body going rigid. You made a medical appointment for my son without asking me? Her voice was quiet but had an edge Richard hadn't heard before. Yes, he admitted, suddenly uncertain. I thought you'd be pleased. Pleased, Elena repeated. Mr. Harrington, you had no right to do that, none at all. Richard felt wrong-footed, like he'd missed a step going downstairs. I was trying to help. By going behind my back, by making decisions about my child's medical care without even consulting me. Elena's voice rose slightly, her accent becoming more pronounced with emotion. Do you have any idea how that feels? To have someone with money decide they know what's best for your family? That's not what I meant to do, Richard protested. Maybe not, but it's what you did. Elena shook her head, her disappointment palpable. I told you about Miguel's condition as an explanation, not as a request for help. I've been managing his care for 3 years. I've researched his condition, built relationships with his doctors, tracked his symptoms, adjusted his diet, and balanced his medications. I am his mother, and I make decisions about his health. Richard felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He had been so caught up in his grand gesture that he hadn't considered how it might appear from Elena's perspective. You're right, he said quietly. I overstepped. I apologize. Elena picked up her bag again, slinging it over her shoulder with a decisive movement. I appreciate that you meant well, Mr. Harrington, but good intentions don't excuse treating me like I'm incapable of caring for my own child. Richard watched helplessly as she walked toward the door. Elena, wait, he called after her. Please, I made a mistake, but I still want to help. Tell me how I can do that without overstepping. She paused at the door, not turning around. I don't need your help, Mr. Harrington. I need my job, my dignity, and your respect. Then she was gone, the door closing firmly behind her. Richard stood alone in his gleaming kitchen, feeling worse than he had when this all began. He had tried to fix a problem and had only succeeded in making it bigger, wounding Elena's pride and possibly damaging their working relationship beyond repair. He poured himself a drink, wondering if she would even return on Monday. If their positions were reversed, he certainly wouldn't. The weekend stretched before him, empty and echoing with his mistake. Usually, Richard filled his free time with work or the occasional social obligation, but neither appealed to him now. Instead, he found himself thinking about Elena and Miguel, picturing their life together, a single mother and her sick child, fighting battles he could barely imagine with a strength he was only beginning to understand. By Sunday evening, Richard had made a decision. If Elena returned to work the next day, he would try again, not with grand gestures or decisions made without her input, but with a genuine offer of partnership. And if she didn't return, well, he would find a way to make things right regardless. Monday. Morning arrived with a knot of tension in Richard's stomach. He deliberately stayed home, waiting to see if Elena would appear at her usual time. At 9:05, when she still hadn't arrived, he felt a sinking sensation. Then, at 9:15, the elevator chimed. Elena stepped into the apartment, her expression carefully neutral. I apologize for being late, she said formally. The subway was delayed. Relief washed over Richard. No apology necessary. I'm just glad you're here. Elena nodded once, then moved to put away her things, clearly intending to begin her work without further discussion. Elena, Richard said, stopping her. Could we talk, please? She turned to face him, her posture wary, but not closed off. About what? About Friday, about my mistake. Richard gestured to the living room. Just 5 minutes of your time. After a moment's hesitation, Elena followed him to the living room, perching on the edge of the sofa while Richard took the chair opposite. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. And you were absolutely right. I had no business making Decisions about Miguel's care without your involvement. It was presumptuous and disrespectful, and I'm truly sorry. Elena's expression softened slightly. Thank you for understanding that. I do understand it now, Richard continued. But I still want to help if you'll let me. Not by taking over or making decisions for you, but by offering resources that might make things easier. He leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. Tell me what would actually be helpful, Elena. What would make a difference for you and Miguel? On your terms? Elena studied him for a long moment, as if assessing his sincerity. Why is this so important to you? She finally asked. You barely know us. It was a fair question, one Richard had been asking himself all weekend. Because I misjudged you, he answered honestly. I set up a test to catch you being dishonest, and instead, I found someone with more integrity than most people I know, including myself. And then I learned that you're working 3 jobs to care for a sick child, and still you tried to pay me for an accident. He shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. It made me realize how skewed my perspective has become. How easily I dismiss people, how rarely I actually see them. Elena's expression remained guarded, but something in her eyes had changed. And now you see me? I'm trying to, Richard admitted. I'd like the chance to do better. She was quiet for so long that Richard thought she might refuse. Then with a small sigh, she said, Miguel's medical bills are covered for now, between my insurance and what I've saved. What we really need is time. Time? Elena nodded. I work 7 days a week between my 3 jobs. Miguel stays with my neighbor when I'm not home, which is most of the time. She's kind, but she's elderly and can't always help him with his exercises or make sure he's taking his medications at the right times. Her voice grew softer. Sometimes weeks go by where I only see him awake for a few hours a day. He's growing up without me there, and I can't get that time back. The simple heartbreak in her words struck Richard with unexpected force. Here was a problem that all his money couldn't directly solve. The fundamental unfairness of a system that forced a mother to choose between being present for her child and providing for his needs. What if you didn't have to work 3 jobs, he asked. What if you could keep this one with the health insurance but at a higher salary? Enough that you could be with Miguel in the evenings and weekends? Elena frowned. My work here doesn't justify that kind of salary. Maybe not the cleaning alone, Richard agreed. But I've been thinking of hiring a property manager for my apartment and vacation home. Someone to oversee maintenance, coordinate with contractors, manage deliveries and services. It would be more responsibility, but also more flexible hours. You could work from home some days, especially when Miguel needs you. Hope flickered briefly in Elena's eyes before doubt replaced it. I don't have experience as a property manager. You have excellent organizational skills, attention to detail, and you're trustworthy, Richard countered. The rest you can learn. I'd rather have someone I trust than someone with a perfect resume. Elena twisted her hands in her lap, clearly torn. It feels like charity. It's not, Richard said firmly. It's a business arrangement that benefits us both. I need someone reliable to manage my properties, and you need a job that pays well enough to let you be with your son. The fact that it solves a problem for you doesn't make it charity. It makes it a good deal for both of us. A tentative smile touched Elena's lips. You've thought this through. I have, Richard agreed. But this time, I'm not making the decision. For you. The offer is there if you want it on your terms. Take some time to think about it. Elena rose to her feet, straightening her uniform with a practiced gesture. I will, she promised. And Mr. Harrington, thank you for seeing me. The real me. Not just your housekeeper. As she went off to begin her work, Richard remained in his chair, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted in his world. For the first time in years, possibly decades, he had looked beyond his own assumptions and seen another person clearly. Not as a function they performed in his life, but as a complete human being with struggles and strengths all their own. It was, he realized with some surprise, the beginning of something he had almost forgotten how to do, connecting with someone else not through the safe distance of a business transaction, but through the messy, complicated reality of genuine human understanding. A month passed, bringing with it subtle changes to both Richard's apartment and his life. Elena had accepted his job offer after taking a few days to consider it. Now, as his property manager, she still handled the cleaning but had also taken on coordinating with the various service providers who kept his luxury lifestyle running smoothly. The personal chef who delivered meals 3 times a week, the dry cleaning service, the art dealer who helped maintain his collection, and the maintenance crew for his vacation home in the Hamptons. Richard had given her a desk in the small room he had previously used for storage, which she had efficiently transformed into a functional office space. He had also provided her with a laptop and phone for work purposes, insisting these were necessary tools for her new position, not gifts. On this particular Wednesday morning, Richard found himself lingering over coffee in the kitchen longer than usual, waiting for Elena to arrive. When she did, he noticed immediately that something was different. There were shadows under her eyes, and her usual composed demeanor seemed fragile, as if held together by sheer force of will. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Everything okay?" Elena set down her bag with a tired smile. "Just a long night. Miguel had a flare-up yesterday. His knee was swollen and painful. We didn't get much sleep." Richard frowned with concern. "Is he better this morning?" "A little. My neighbor is staying with him today so he can rest." She moved to pour herself a cup of coffee, her movements slower than usual. "Maybe you should be home with him," Richard suggested gently. Elena shook her head. "There's too much to do here. The contractor for the Hampton house is coming today to discuss the bathroom renovation, and the art appraiser is scheduled for this afternoon." "I can handle the contractor call," Richard said, "and the art appraisal can wait. Your son needs you more than my paintings do." Elena looked at him with surprise. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Richard waved away her concern. "Go home, Elena. Be with Miguel. That's more important." Something in her expression softened. "Thank you," she said simply, gathering her things. "I'll make up the hours next week." "Don't worry about that," Richard told her. "Just take care of your boy." After she left, Richard found himself at loose ends. He had cleared his morning to speak with Elena about the property renovations, and now had unexpected free time. On impulse, he called Thomas. "Can you believe I'm actually managing my own affairs today?" he joked when his friend answered. "My property manager had to take a personal day, and I'm left to fend for myself with contractors and appraisers." "The horror," Thomas laughed. "How's that working out for you?" "Surprisingly well," Richard admitted. "I just rescheduled the art appraiser, and I'm about to call the contractor about renovations at the Hampton house." "Look at you, all grown up and handling your own life," Thomas teased. "And how are things going with Elena? Still testing her? Integrity?" Richard winced at the reminder. "No, nothing like that. In fact, she's now my property manager. She's doing an excellent job." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's quite a promotion from housekeeper. Any particular reason?" Richard hesitated, then found himself telling Thomas about Elena's situation, her son's illness, her 3 jobs, her fierce independence and dignity, even when accepting help. As he spoke, he realized how much he had come to admire her resilience and integrity. "Sounds like you've gotten to know her pretty well," Thomas observed when Richard finished. "I suppose I have," Richard agreed. "It's been educational." Thomas hummed thoughtfully. "Just be careful, Rich. Remember, there's still an employer-employee relationship there. Power dynamics can get complicated." Richard bristled slightly. "It's not like that. I respect her too much to take advantage." "I know you do," Thomas said gently. "Just something to keep in mind, that's all." After hanging up, Richard found himself mulling over Thomas's warning. Was he overstepping again, in a different way? He didn't think so. His interest in Elena and Miguel was genuine concern, not something inappropriate or exploitative. Still, Thomas had a point about power dynamics. He would need to be mindful of that. The next day, Elena returned to work looking more rested. "Miguel's feeling much better," she reported when Richard asked. Thank you again for yesterday. It meant a lot to him to have me there. I'm glad I could help, Richard said. How long has he had juvenile arthritis? Since he was 4, Elena replied, settling into what had become their morning routine of coffee and conversation before beginning the workday. It started with a swollen knee that wouldn't get better. The doctors thought it was just a sports injury at first, but when it spread to other joints, they finally diagnosed him correctly. That must have been scary, Richard said, trying to imagine facing such a diagnosis as a parent. Elena nodded. Terrifying. I knew nothing about the disease then. I spent every free moment researching, trying to understand what we were dealing with. A small smile touched her lips. Miguel was braver than I was. He told me not to worry, that he was just extra special now. Richard found himself smiling at the child's resilience. He sounds like an amazing kid. I'd like to meet him someday if that would be okay with you. The words were out before he could consider their implications. There was a moment of surprised silence, and Richard wondered if he had overstepped again. Then Elena nodded slowly. I think he would like that. He's been curious about where I work now. He calls you the computer man because I told him you made your money with technology. Richard laughed. I've been called worse. Maybe you could bring him here sometime when he's feeling up to it, or... He hesitated, then pushed forward. I could come by your place, if that would be easier for him. No pressure either way. Elena studied him for a moment as if trying to decipher his motivation. Why don't you come for dinner this Sunday? Nothing fancy, but Miguel would be more comfortable at home and you could see where we live. I'd like that, Richard said, surprised by how much he meant it. Sunday arrived with an unexpected flutter of nervousness in Richard's stomach. He debated what to bring, finally settling on a dinosaur book for Miguel. Elena had mentioned his fascination with paleontology, and a simple bouquet of flowers that wouldn't suggest anything inappropriate. Elena's apartment was in a modest building, in a working-class neighborhood, far from Richard's luxury high-rise. The elevator was out of order, so he climbed 4 flights of stairs, mentally noting that this would be difficult for a child with mobility issues on bad days. Elena opened the door at his knock, looking different in jeans and a casual sweater, rather than her work clothes. Welcome, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Miguel's very excited to meet you. The apartment was small, but immaculately kept, with cheerful yellow walls and furniture that showed signs of wear but was clean and well arranged. From somewhere inside, Richard heard the sound of a child's laughter. Miguel, Elena called. Our guest is here. A boy appeared from one of the bedrooms, moving with a slight limp but otherwise energetically. He had Elena's dark eyes and warm smile, his face lighting up with curiosity as he saw Richard. You're the computer man, he exclaimed. Mom says you have a really big apartment with windows all the way to the ceiling. Richard laughed, immediately charmed by the boy's directness. That's right. And you must be Miguel, the space expert. He held out the wrapped book. I brought you something. Miguel's eyes widened as he unwrapped the gift. Dinosaurs of the Jurassic period, he read excitedly. Mom, look at all the pictures. What do we say when someone gives us a gift? Elena prompted gently. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, Miguel said, already flipping through the pages. You can call me Richard, he told the boy, then glanced at Elena for approval. She nodded with a small smile. Dinner's almost ready, she said. Miguel, why don't you show Richard your space models while I finish up? Miguel eagerly led Richard to his small bedroom, which was indeed covered in pictures of stars and planets. A solar system mobile hung from the ceiling, and a shelf held an impressive collection of model rockets and spaceships. Did you build all these? Richard asked, genuinely impressed by the detail. Miguel nodded proudly. Mom helps with the small parts sometimes when my hands hurt. I'm going to be an astronaut one day or maybe a dinosaur scientist. I haven't decided yet. You could be both, Richard suggested. A paleontologist who goes to space to look for dinosaur fossils on other planets. Miguel's eyes grew round. Could there be dinosaurs on other planets? We don't know yet, Richard said. That's why we need brave explorers like you to find out. By the time Elena called them to dinner, Richard had been thoroughly educated on both the International Space Station and the feeding habits of the Triceratops. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his knowledge impressive for his age. Dinner was simple but delicious. A homemade lasagna with a fresh salad. Richard noticed that Elena had cut Miguel's portion into small, manageable pieces, accommodating the limitations of his sometimes painful fingers without making a fuss about how the conversation flowed easily, centered mostly around Miguel's interests and school adventures. Richard found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did at the formal dinner parties he occasionally attended. There was no pretense here, no hidden agendas or networking opportunities to navigate. Just a small family welcoming him into their home. After dinner, while Elena was clearing the dishes despite Richard's offers to help, Miguel grew quieter, studying Richard with a sudden seriousness that seemed beyond his years. "My mom works for you," he stated. "Yes, she does," Richard agreed, wondering where this was going. "She works really hard," Miguel continued. "Sometimes too hard, I think. She gets very tired." Richard nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. "Your mom is one of the hardest working people I've ever met." Miguel leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "She used to cry sometimes when she thought I was asleep, about bills and stuff. But she doesn't do that anymore since she started working at your house." Richard felt something catch in his throat. "I'm glad," he managed to say. "Me too," Miguel said with a decisive nod. "So thank you for giving my mom a good job, and for coming to dinner. Nobody ever comes to dinner except Grandma Rosa, and she always pinches my cheeks too hard." Richard couldn't help laughing at the boy's candor. "Well, I promise not to pinch your cheeks at all." "Good," Miguel said suddenly, brightening. "Does that mean you'll come back again?" From the kitchen doorway, Elena cleared her throat. "Miguel, don't put Richard on the spot like that." "It's fine," Richard assured her, surprised to realize how much he meant it. "I'd be happy to come back sometime, if that's okay with your mom." As he left that evening, walking down the 4 flights of stairs with the warm glow of the evening still wrapped around him, Richard realized something had fundamentally changed. He had come to Elena's home out of curiosity and perhaps a lingering sense of guilt. But he was leaving with something unexpected, a genuine connection to her and her son that had nothing to do with wealth or position or power. For the first time and longer than he could remember, Richard had spent an evening not as a millionaire or a CEO or a benefactor, but simply as a person breaking bread with other people. And somehow that felt richer than anything his money had ever bought him. 6 months had passed since the day Richard left his safe open, a seemingly small action that had unexpectedly changed the course of multiple lives. Spring had given way to summer, and summer was now yielding to the first crisp days of fall. The leaves in the park across from Richard's building were beginning to turn, painting the view from his windows with splashes of gold and crimson. On this particular morning, Richard stood at those windows, coffee in hand, watching the early joggers circle the park paths. Behind him, Elena moved quietly through the apartment, not cleaning now but organizing documents for their meeting later that day. In the months since she had become his property manager, she had transformed not just his homes but aspects of his business as well, bringing the same meticulous attention to detail that had first impressed him to everything she touched. The contractor finally sent the updated quotes for the Hampton house renovation, Elena said, placing a folder on the kitchen island. "I negotiated them down almost 15% from the initial bid." Richard smiled. "Remind me to give you a bonus for that alone. Those guys have been trying to overcharge me for years." Elena shook her head, but he caught the small, pleased smile that touched her lips. "Just doing my job." "How's Miguel this morning?" Richard asked, moving to review the documents she'd prepared. "Excited. Today's the field trip to the planetarium. He's been talking about it for weeks." Her expression softened, as it always did when she spoke of her son. "The new medication Dr. Chen prescribed seems to be working well. He hasn't had a flare-up in nearly a month." Dr. Chen had indeed become Miguel's rheumatologist, but on Elena's terms. After their initial disagreement, Richard had simply given Elena the doctor's contact information. making it clear that the choice to call was entirely hers. When she eventually did make an appointment, she did so as Miguel's advocate, not as Richard's charity case. "That's great news," Richard said sincerely. "Will he be at Rosa's after school today?" "Yes, until I finish here. We're still on for dinner. At your friend's restaurant, right?" Elena asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Absolutely. Tomas is looking forward to meeting you and Miguel." Richard had finally convinced Elena to join him for dinner at his friend's upscale restaurant, wanting to introduce the two most important people in his life. "Don't worry. I told him to reserve the private dining room so Miguel won't feel overwhelmed." "It's not Miguel I'm worried about," Elena admitted with a small laugh. "That boy would chat with a brick wall. It's me. I've never been to a restaurant that fancy." "You'll be the most impressive person there," Richard assured her. "Trust me, after dealing with entitled Silicon Valley types all day, Thomas will find you refreshingly real." The intercom buzzed, announcing the arrival of their 9 o'clock appointment. Elena straightened, shifting smoothly into her professional mode as she went to let in the lawyer Richard had hired to help with a new project, one that had been taking shape in his mind for months. By late afternoon, the legal details had been hammered out, documents signed, and plans set in motion. As the lawyer left, Richard felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the early days of building his company. "I still can't quite believe you're doing this," Elena said, collecting the empty coffee cups from the conference table they'd set up in Richard's dining room. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it's an amazing thing you're doing. I just never expected." She trailed off, seeming at a loss for words. "Neither did I," Richard admitted. "But it feels right." The project they had spent the day finalizing was the Richard Harrington Education Foundation, specifically designed to help single parents complete their interrupted education. The foundation would provide not just tuition, but comprehensive support, childcare, healthcare, living stipends, and mentorship. And Elena, with her first-hand understanding of the challenges these families faced, would be its first director once she completed her own education. That was the other surprise Richard had arranged: Elena's acceptance to the pre-med program at the city university, with a schedule flexible enough to accommodate her continued work and parenting responsibilities. When he had first suggested she might resume her medical studies, she had dismissed the idea as an impossible dream. But Richard had persisted, helping her navigate the application process and financial aid options until she finally agreed to try. "You should get going if you're going to pick up Miguel and get ready for dinner," Richard reminded her, glancing at his watch. Elena nodded, gathering her things. "We'll meet you at the restaurant at 7. And Richard, thank you for everything." After she left, Richard found himself reflecting on how much had changed in 6 months. The safe in his office remained unlocked these days, not as a test, but as a reminder of where this journey had begun. Sometimes he would open it and look at the small crystal hummingbird that Elena had once so carefully repaired, now displayed on the top shelf rather than hidden away. He had originally planned to test Elena's honesty, never imagining that she would end up testing his character instead, challenging his assumptions, pushing him to be better, showing him what real integrity looked like. Thomas had been right all those months ago. When you looked for the worst in people, that's often what you found. But Richard had accidentally discovered the opposite truth as well. When you recognized the best in people and gave them the chance to thrive, amazing things could happen. That evening, as Richard entered the private dining room of Thomas's restaurant, he was struck by the sight of Elena and Miguel already seated at the table, deep in conversation with his old friend. Elena wore a simple but elegant dress that Richard had never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. Miguel, despite the formality of the setting, was animatedly describing something to Tomas, his hands moving in expressive gestures. And that's why the T-Rex couldn't actually run very fast, even though the movies show it chasing cars and stuff, Miguel was explaining as Richard approached. Tomas looked up with a grin. "Richard, your young friend here has been educating me on why everything I thought I knew about dinosaurs is wrong. He has that effect on people." Richard laughed, taking his seat. I hope you haven't been waiting long. Not at all, Elena assured him. Tomas was just telling us how you two met in college. Did he mention that he was the one who had to bail me out of jail after that protest? Tomas asked with a mischievous glint in his eye. Richard groaned. I was hoping to maintain at least a little dignity here. You got arrested? Miguel asked, his eyes wide with fascination. For a good cause, Richard clarified quickly. We were protesting unfair housing policies on campus. Richard has always had a bit of a rebellious streak, Tomas told Miguel. He just hides it better these days under all those expensive suits. As the evening progressed, Richard watched the easy interaction between his old friend and Elena, feeling a sense of rightness he couldn't quite explain. There was none of the awkwardness he had feared. No condescension from Tomas. No discomfort from Elena. Instead, they had connected immediately over their shared experience of losing parents young and having to grow up quickly. When dessert arrived, a spectacular chocolate creation that had Miguel's eyes growing round, Tomas raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, he said, looking meaningfully at Richard, and to finding family in unexpected places. Miguel, lifting his glass of sparkling cider with solemn ceremony, added, and to dinosaurs in space. The adults laughed, clinking their glasses together as Miguel beamed, pleased with his addition to the toast. Later, as they were preparing to leave, Tomas pulled Richard aside while Elena helped Miguel with his jacket. You've changed, Tomas observed quietly. For the better, I hope, Richard replied. Tomas nodded, his expression unusually serious. Definitely for the better. I haven't seen you this happy in years, maybe ever. He glanced over at Elena and Miguel. They're good for you. They are, Richard agreed. I never expected any of this, you know. I just wanted to test if my housekeeper was honest. Tomas laughed softly. And instead, you found out who you really are. He clapped Richard on the shoulder. Don't mess it up. I'm trying not to, Richard promised. Outside the restaurant, the autumn evening was cool but pleasant. Miguel, tired from the excitement of the day but still buzzing with the sugar from dessert, walked between Richard and Elena, occasionally skipping despite his slight limp. Can we go to the park tomorrow? He asked, looking up at his mother. I want to show Richard how high I can go on the swings now. Elena smiled. If Richard isn't too busy with work. I think my schedule just opened up completely, Richard said, ruffling Miguel's hair gently. Swings it is. As they walked toward the waiting car, Richard felt a small hand slip into his. Looking down in surprise, he found Miguel grinning up at him, his other hand firmly clasped in his mother's. Without thinking, Richard tightened his grip slightly, this simple gesture of trust from a child meaning more to him than any business deal he had ever closed. On Elena's other side, the safe in his office remained unlocked, its door slightly ajar, no longer a trap or a test, but a symbol of the openness with which he was trying to live his life now. The money inside was just paper, meaningless compared to the wealth he had found in human connection. 6 months ago, Richard Harrington had left his safe open to test his maid's honesty. He could never have anticipated that this simple act would lead him to question not her character but his own, or that in doing so, he would find the parts of himself that had been locked away far more securely than any possession.